Dear chess friends, this is MVP bringing you the sixth part of my international chess course on the Caro-Kann defense. So it is now a fantasy variation: e4 c6, d4, d5, f3. In 2013, the Russian Grandmaster Bezhodov wrote the book about this variation, so maybe this continuation would be popular on the club level or even above club player. And here already I made something unusual. Many of my previous variations were based on the book of Lars Chandler for Grandmaster Repertoire 7, the Caro-Kann defense, but here it's all my analysis because I like the e6 move. It is something like Caro-Kann with the French defense, and sometimes white can just transpose to the French defense, but as I already said, it was written in the Bezhodov's book that it is better to play just with the fantasy variation without any transposition, and personally no one with me played the French defense from this position. Everyone are playing just normal fantasy variations moves, but you must consider that possibility when playing the e6 move. Of course, white has many options here. The first one is bishop f4. It isn't a very good move because queen b6 attacking the b2 pawn. The b pawn is frequently attacked in the fantasy variation. b3, knight f6, e5, knight fd7, and of course here white made a mistake. It was an amateur game against Grandmaster. c4 and just c5, c takes d5, it takes d5. White has almost lost position already here, but they didn't play even knight c3, but after c takes d4, knight a4, queen a6, knight e2, knight e5, black would have just the pawn up, but bishop e3 just loses. Knight c6, d takes c5, bishop c5, bishop c5, knight c5, f4, knight e4, queen c2, queen e3, knight e2, knight b4, and white resigned in the game Simon against Dimitrachi Ivoine 2001. So you see that fantasy variation could be a disaster for white sometimes. The other white option is bishop d3, but here black can just take on e4. If bishop e4, then f5, bishop d3, queen d4, knight e2, queen h4, g3, queen f6, and then black just plays bishop c5, knight d7, and black has black is a pawn up just. F takes e4, queen takes d4, knight f3, queen b6, queen e2, knight d7, knight bd2. Here already black has to play a novelty: knight gf6, knight c4, queen c7, bishop d2, b5, bishop e5, knight b6, knight c5, bishop b7, and black just waits. If white castles kingside, then black castles kingside. If white castles queenside, then black castles queenside. So the next white option is e5. c5, and I was talking about it. White can play f4, and it is a French defense, or they can play c3, knight c6, f4, and it's also French defense. It is slightly dubious variations for white, but you must be ready for it. I don't tell about the French defenses in this video. I just telling about the Caro-Kann defense, and it is bishop e3 move. It's the second most popular move. The most popular move, knight c3, would be analyzed in the next chapter. Here black plays queen b6, and it's a common idea. Black just takes the b2 pawn. Sometimes white plays queen c1, but then c5 follows. Of course, d takes c5, bishop c5, bishop c5, queen c5. E takes d5 is possible, but knight f6 taken on e6 is just a suicide. So knight c3, knight d5, knight d5, queen d5, and then black can play bishop d7, bishop c6, and here already the position is equal. Sometimes this happens in the fantasy variation. c3, knight c6, knight e2 is also a transposition to some French defense, but knight f6, c5, knight d7, f4, and f6. Of course, in French, queen isn't on c1. G3, c takes d4, c takes d4, and we must know that sometimes black has a move bishop b4, just finishing development with a tempo. King f2, f takes e5, f takes e5. It was Grandmaster Hennigan's game playing black, and here he had an interesting combination. He didn't play that. Knight d takes e5, d takes e5, d4, bishop f4, d3, bishop e3, and here black can just play d takes e2, bishop b6, and maybe he overlooks that there is a move e1 queen e1, and castles, king e2, bishop e1, king e1, a takes b6. The 5 pawn isn't in this vote, and the black has a better endgame, of course. So d takes c5 is more common move. Bishop takes c5, bishop takes c5, queen takes c5, and queen g5. So black can sacrifice a pawn on g7 like in French defense. Knight g7, queen g7, rook g8. It is too greedy to take on h7 due to queen b6, and then b2 pawn falls, and c3 and a2. So the better option is queen f6 and queen e3, knight e2, e5. Black bishop will develop on e6, knight a3, bishop a6, knight c2, queen b6, castle queenside, castle queenside. Yes, white has an extra pawn, but black wants to play d takes e4, and the e2 pawn is hanging, and white's king side isn't developed, so they have a compensation for a pawn. It was the queen c1 move. The other white's option is bishop d3, but after queen b2, knight d2, it's a transposition to the main continuation, knight d2, queen b2, and of course bishop d3. If knight b3, then queen a3, bishop d3, bishop b4, bishop d2, bishop d2, queen d2, knight e7, and black just has an extra pawn. So bishop d3, queen a3, and it's a main position. And this line, of course, white has slight lead in the development because black done 3 moves with the queen. Now white can develop one more piece, but the position is closed, like the French defense. White can't do the position open, so this tempos has no impact on the game. And black's idea is to finish the development and do the c5 break at some point. Once white played queen e2, knight f6, knight b3, bishop b4, king f2, slightly ugly move, d takes e4, takes e4, and e5. It is possible because white moved the king on f2. If bishop c1, then queen a4, bishop b2, it takes d4, bishop d4, knight g4, king f1, castle kingside, and of course black has an advantage, but it was probably better than h3, bishop c3, like in the game war against Bogdan Lalic 1998, and the white's position is almost lost already here. The recent Grandmaster game was Ivanishevich Palingras 2012, and white played knight h3. Of course, I think that the theory here ended for Grandmaster Palingras because after knight f6, castle kingside c5, black just has a better position because they can finish their development after c takes d4, bishop d4, bishop c5, and just has an extra pawn. So the main move is knight e2, knight f6. It's already a novelty, so it's a very uncommon continuation, the fantasy variation, so we can do novelties on the move 7. And here, if white plays castles and c5, we know that idea, of course, already. If it takes d5, it takes d5, and white has problems with their bishop on e3 because the black's threatens c4. And if c3 has a knight c6, black just finishes the development and has an extra pawn. So the best chance for white is knight b3, and here already black has no c5 break, but they can play b6. It's a known idea from some French defense line. Black just plays b6, bishop a6, bishop c1, queen e7, castle kingside, bishop a6. Here white can play a4, bishop d3, and queen b7, protecting the a8 rook and finishing development of the dark squared bishop. Bishop g5, knight bd7, e5, and knight g8. Everything is alright because white can open the position. f4, knight e7. Of course, white has some compensation for the pawn, but they have no play. Black can play knight h5, after h5, bishop e7, and they finish their development. The only white's play is to play something like rook fb1, a5, but it isn't looking dangerous for black. Also, white can play here bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, and here black can play queen a3, because otherwise white moved a4, and if e5, knight fd7, f4, g6, white has a compensation for the pawn, but they can't open the position, and black can also try to castle queenside, so the position is very difficult, but I think that black is slightly better here. So let's make a conclusion on the chapter 6. We started to analyze the fantasy Caro-Kann variation. White can sacrifice the pawn, but black takes the pawn. After bishop d3 on the black can play taking on e4 and taking the pawn on d4, and if white plays bishop f4 or bishop e3, black plays queen b6 and queen b2. Of course, white is getting 3 or 4 tempers on the development, but the resultant positions are closed, and white can't open such positions. Sometimes even black can open this position by playing the break c6, c5. Of course, in the practical game, white has some decent compensation for the pawn, because then they can play something like sacrifices of pawn and rooks and so on and so on. But I think if black would be playing good, the white's attacks would be stopped, and the material advantage in the endgame gives black a victory. So thank you for watching this video till the end. If you like it, you consider leaving a like, and see you next time.